What's going on, everybody? I'm Johnny Brook. Welcome back to another Crafted Workshop video. In this video, I'm going to show you how to turn these vintage jack stands into these awesome side tables. Stay tuned. This project idea came about during my parents' recent move. They were cleaning out their attic and found these vintage jack stands that they had stored away for who knows how many years, and my mom thought they'd make a cool project. She did some Pinteresting and decided that they'd make some perfect side tables. I decided this would be a great project to get more use out of my plasma cutter, which is a Lincoln Electric Tomahawk 375. I really love this thing. It has a built-in air compressor, so it's super easy to just pull out and get to cutting. Lincoln also makes a circle cutting kit for the plasma cutter, so I thought, why not make the tabletop circles? I used some 1/4-inch diamond plate steel for the tops, and if you don't have a plasma cutter and want to do this project, you've got a few options. First, you could just make your tabletop square or rectangular and just cut it out with an angle grinder. Second, you could find a friend who has a plasma cutter and use their machine. And third, you could probably find a local fabrication shop to cut the circles for you for pretty cheap. I'm still getting used to the plasma cutter, and I actually think I need to turn the power down next time I use it, since I was getting a lot of dross buildup. Dross is the name for the melted metal that's formed on the bottom of the piece you're cutting. Sometimes the dross will flow back together, and it essentially seals the cut that you just made back together, and it's really annoying. Heavy dross is usually caused by two things: too slow of a cutting speed or too much power, and both those I can chalk up to user error. I had to go back in a few spots and freehand cut some of the dross, but eventually I freed both of the circles with a little bit of pounding with the rubber mallet. After I got the circles cut, I needed to cut some small pieces to go between the bottom of the tabletop and the top of the jack stands. The stands have a little gap at the edges of the stand, and that gap wouldn't really give me much of a weld surface, so I just measured off of the jack stand and cut them with an angle grinder. After all my pieces were cut, I ground them down on the belt sander. I really just wanted to flatten the small pieces since the diamond plate pattern created kind of a big gap, and also wanted to clean up the edges. I also cleaned up the circles on the grinder. Unfortunately, I didn't leave enough room between the tool rest and the platen, and then this happened. In case you're wondering, a piece of dross got caught between the tool rest and platen and broke my brand new 40 grit Cubitron ceramic belt, which cost $8. I adjusted the tool rest and got back to work. I didn't want the edges to be perfectly shiny necessarily. I just wanted to remove the dross and any sharp areas. If you don't have a belt grinder, you could just as easily use an angle grinder. After my pieces were cleaned up, it was time to get to welding. I used flux core MIG on this project since I knew I'd be welding on some not so perfect surfaces with rust, mill scale, and paint. First, I welded the small filler pieces to the bottom of the tabletop. I just tacked them in place and then ran a bead on each side. Next, I welded the top of the jack stand to the bottom of the tabletop. One note here, anytime you're welding through paint, it's going to create some nasty fumes, and you really have no idea what the content of the paint is on these older pieces. So make sure you've got plenty of ventilation and preferably wear a respirator. Here you can see how adding the little pieces of steel gave me a lot more weld surface. This probably wasn't completely necessary since the most weight this table will be supporting is probably a few drinks and maybe a book. But I like to overbuild things. I could probably park my car on top of these things. After I finished welding, I ground down my welds with a grinding wheel. And then I switched to a flap disc and lightly sanded the top. Again, I just wanted to remove any rough edges and kind of clean it up. Next, I welded the tops to the base of the jack stand, and this was a little tricky since the jack stands don't really sit perfectly square inside the stand, so I just kind of had to eyeball it, but it turned out fine. I just tacked it in a few spots and then ran one bead on each stand, and they are plenty sturdy. To prep for finish, I sanded the top with 80 grit sandpaper and then wiped down all of the surfaces with denatured alcohol. After getting everything prepped for finish, I decided the top needed a little something extra to give it a little pop, so I added a little racing stripe in white to kind of tie the top in with the base. And after that dried, I added a few coats of clear enamel. I made sure to cover the top and any of the welded areas really well, as they're going to be extremely prone to rusting. After I had a few coats on, the tables were done.
All right guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this build. This was a lot of fun. It was relatively simple, but really any of these metalworking projects are helpful for me. I'm still very new at welding, using the plasma cutter. If I did anything wrong in the video, cut me some slack. I'm still learning, but I'm really happy with the way these turned out. This was a great idea for my mom. If you don't have some of these vintage jack stands, which odds are you probably don't, it turns out Harbor Freight sells almost the exact same looking jack stands. They're gray instead of red, but you could always paint them and do a very similar project if this is a look that you like. The 1/4-inch steel I got from my local scrap salvage yard, and it was extremely cheap. So if you guys have one of those in your area, check them out. It's like 18 cents a pound or something like that for steel in my area. If you guys don't already know and have been missing the Weekly Maker Roundups, I have started a second channel, so definitely go check that out. That's where all the Weekly Maker Roundups, tool reviews, event coverage, that kind of stuff, anything non-project related is gonna go from here on out. And if you don't already subscribe to this channel, definitely go ahead and do that. I have new project videos here every Tuesday. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. That is extremely helpful for me. And last, if you want to support me further, get some cool perks and rewards, go to Patreon. It's patreon.com/craftedworkshop. I'm gonna have these t-shirts up there. It's a lot of cool perks over there. So definitely check that out and help to support me and keep these projects going. All right guys, thanks again for watching, and until next time, happy building.